All right, everybody, we'll make a start, if you please. So, a warm welcome to all those attending and to our viewers watching live on the Council's YouTube channel, Hillingdon, London. This is the meeting of the External Services Select Committee, and details of the business to be considered today is shown on the agenda, copies of which are available in the room and is also accessible online under the live broadcast. For those present in the room and intended to speak, please note that you will be filmed and any statements you make will be recorded and made public. For those solely observing in the room today, you may wish to know that the camera is angled away from the public gallery where you are sitting. A reminder to anyone speaking today that your voice will only be audible online if the microphone is switched on. A couple of housekeeping things. We are not expecting a fire drill, so if the fire alarm goes off, please follow Nikki to the fire exits and out of the building to the designated meeting point. Mobile devices, for those in the room, please switch off any mobile devices before the meeting starts or put them on silent. Resident feedback forms, if you are so minded, can you please complete one of the orange resident feedback forms? The information on these forms is intended to help us improve the way that we run our meetings. Forms can be completed and left in the room for collection after the meeting, or completed and returned by post to the address on the form. If you're watching on YouTube, you can also complete the form online, and there is a link below the broadcast. Declarations of interest, please ensure that you identify which item you have an interest in, state whether your interest is pecuniary or non-pecuniary, and give the reason that you have an interest. Members need not declare an interest in any item on the agenda where they have already listed this interest in the register of interests. Furthermore, you do not need to declare an interest just because you are a ward councillor or because you are a governor. Good, all right. So we'll start with the agenda, and apologies for absence.
Chairman, we've had apologies from Councillor Harangi, we've had apologies from Councillor Milani, Councillor Lakmana and Councillor Lynn Allen is here as her substitute, and Councillor Jean Nelson and Councillor Mathers is here as her substitute.
All right, thank you, and welcome to both of you. Declarations of interest I've already dealt with in matters coming before the meeting. Anybody? All right, thank you. This is to also confirm at item 3 that all matters in part 1 will be considered in public, and items in part 2 will be in private, but we rarely have any items in part 2, and that is the same for today. Minutes of the meeting of the 14th of January, which was the post office meeting, which was extremely interesting, and as you can see from the minutes, a great deal of material was covered, and in fact, Nikki's already sent around some further and background information that was sent to us from our colleagues from the post office, which I expect everybody's had and seen. So that's good. So any matters arising out of the minutes, Councillor?
It was extremely disappointing that YouTube wasn't working that night, because I had residents who had told that we were discussing the post office, and I told them I'd been informing this body of the problems they were going to experience after November 21st, and then to find there was nothing, and some of what I'd said at that meeting wasn't here, and I didn't know, and with great respect to your minute taking, I wondered if you were taking your minutes expecting to read YouTube, watch YouTube and fit in the dots, because there's some of it's not here. If you recall, Mr. Chairman, I raised concerns that residents who use the post office for pensions or benefits, that was going to finish on November 21, and they were informed they had to open bank accounts. Now, some residents don't want to open bank accounts, and I did raise this at that meeting. We were told by the post office that they could open bank accounts but still use the post office to draw their cash out. Well, we learn that all ATMs are going to start charging. So anybody on pension or benefits is now going to have to pay $1.99 or £2 every time they want to draw money out, pension or benefit. And that is another tax on the residents who's already struggling. I also raised the footfall issue that is going to affect small businesses. If you're a small business and you take on a post office account, you're expecting footfall. Someone who goes in to collect their benefits or pension will pay their gas, electric, TV licence, everything else. And then they'll look around the shop and think, I'll buy sugar, bread. Well, all that will be gone. So anybody signing up to open a small post office will not have that footfall. And this will have effect on the corner shop who opens as a post office or the town centre. This at a time when we're told that everything is being geared to look after the small business and the town centre. I said at the time, I asked those present what had been done about it, and they said they were aware, but they couldn't. And I asked if we could write to the government on this issue. Now, I'm aware that we, as a group, can't, but we can ask that the cabinet member write to the government with our concerns about post offices and residents' concerns. It all comes under terms of reference 4 and 5. So I'd like that in the minutes, because I did raise it at the meeting. Thank you.
The minutes do, on page 3, contain references to the business working and the Department of Work and Pensions and how the Post Office representatives explained to us how that all worked. And going through the minutes, certainly as far as I could see, it's a very detailed and fair reflection of what we were of the information that we were given, especially about business and especially about the way in which residents use the services, which were things that we brought up before them. So certainly from my perspective, that the information in the minutes is accurate and detailed. In terms of further information and representations, these minutes do go to the cabinet members as well, to see what's been said in regard to various areas that touch on their portfolios. But I think if there's anything specific that you want to be raised, then the best thing to do is possibly to write to me, and I'll consider the particular points that you have to raise.
Are you saying to me that you are not willing, as the chair of this committee, after hearing this, that you are not willing to write on our behalf, or is nobody else in agreement with what I'm saying?
No, it's a matter for the members of the committee as a whole, not just for me, but it's much more important that if you want to raise something specific that came out of the meeting, that you can write to me with that detail, and I'll have a look at it and see if it is something that we can. But if it's something that the whole committee want me to take up, then I better hear from other people.
So you're not interested?
What do other committee members think, Councillor On?
Thank you, Chairman. Personally, I think a lot of this is covered in the minutes. I recognise what you're saying there, but it is covered on the bottom, page 3, that the Department of Pension are looking into this issue, and we'll have a solution by 2021. Well, you can laugh, but that's what it says there, and that was brought out in the meeting. So I think to preempt something that they are going to do, saying that they're not going to do it, I think is a bit like trying to prove a negative. So I'm happy with the way it is at the moment.
Through the chair. Through the chair.
Councillor, just give me a moment. President.
I mean, I think last meeting was an excellent meeting, and like you, I'm sad it wasn't on YouTube in a way, because it was really interesting. I learned a lot, and we, and that was credit to the people who gave us evidence as well, because they did deal with our questions. I'm afraid to say, essentially, I think we don't really have any power in this aspect. I don't think we can influence and make any difference in that aspect, and that was quite well explained. So I don't really think it's for the committee to write a letter. I think in terms of your own personal position, you making that public, very public complaint, and you writing a letter, obviously very acceptable, or even more widely from the Labour group, but I just don't think, I don't think there's any potential benefit for us doing that, is my personal opinion.
Yes.
Thank you, Chair. Could I suggest that maybe the committee in the minutes notes that there was concern around the impact on Post Office as in its own committee? I wasn't there last meeting, so I can't say what happened. But with Lynn's point around the actual concern for residents with the vulnerability the Post Office faced with this change from the DWP, that although it may not have been agreed to write a letter, I don't know if it was or not, just noting the concern as a committee that the future doesn't look particularly positive, and hopefully a solution will resolve that, but there's still many factors that are concerned.
It was certainly it was gone into in some considerable detail in terms of our questioning of the witnesses in any event, in terms of the various practices and the way in which different people in which different groups use the post office. All right, Councillor Arnold, then we'll move on.
Just quickly, it does actually say, as many of these residents paid their bills in the post office, concern was expressed. So I don't know what more concern.
No. And of course, our discussion now about the minutes will be noted in the minutes that are being written about this in relation to this meeting. All right. Well, very quickly, because we must move on.
With the greatest respect, this is going to happen in November 21. If you know someone's going to fall over a cliff, and you can stop them falling over a cliff, you don't wait until November 21 and then say, oh, there's an issue here. You raise it now, and a good government would listen to what the residents are saying.
Well, the problem is we can't actually do anything to stop it in any event, but issues were raised on the last occasion. All right. Any other matters arising out of the minutes? Otherwise agreed? All right, thank you. So we will move on now to the main item, Safer Hillingdon Partnership Performance Monitoring. But first, we will hear from a representative of, I think, Youth Parliament, from Musa MacArthur. Now, we've had the survey, the Hillingdon Youth Council Knife Crime Survey and Results 2019, and I know everybody's read this because there was a great deal of interest in this, and we really welcome this and are very grateful to you for bringing this to us. But perhaps before we look at this further or ask any questions about it, you'd like to present it to us.
Well, firstly, thank you for having me here today. There were two things actually that I want to present. So the survey that we done, but also the Make Your Mark results. So Make Your Mark is an annual ballot that people from across the country, anyone between 11 and 18, can vote in. And the results for Hillingdon, from an option of 5, from option of curriculum for life, child poverty, mental health, street harassment and end to knife crime, 55% of those chose knife crime. So I think that's a very important figure, seeing as that's an issue that people, young people in Hillingdon really care about. And then moving on to the knife crime survey, obviously you can read, I'm sure you've read that in depth, but I want to pick out some important comments that were given. So firstly, there were 68 responses. Now I understand that's not a lot of responses, and we're hoping to increase that. And also there was an issue of how representative it was of young people across Hillingdon, whether it's ethnicity or race or class or background. So that's something that I'm going to discuss a little later. So if you go to, for example, question 2, when it says about why people feel unsafe, things on continuously knife crime came up. There's talk of little security. So again, that's something that I'm hoping the committee can see into and see how that can be changed. But I think most importantly, how young people feel that can be changed. And there's so many different comments that were made. One of them that I think is really important to pick up on, and something that I feel, is the lack of education in schools on knife crime. Now, every week in my school, we have personal development, 1 hour a week. And for the whole time I've been in school, not once have we had a lesson on knife crime. Probably the biggest issue facing young people, and not a single lesson has been on knife crime. And continuously here we see there's not enough education on knife crime, and that I think that's something the council has to look into, and it continuously comes up. The second thing is opportunities for young people. So one thing that I personally started this year, a project that I started, was youth entrepreneurship. So getting young people into business from an early age, and I think that's one thing that hopefully I can possibly work with you later on. That I think will help when it comes to knife crime, getting young people off the streets and into better environments. And I think that's something that's really important, opportunities for young people. Again, issues such as stop and search. What we found quite surprising was that from the responses, actually 60% of the responses said that they want more stop and search. So although that might not be completely representative, and I mentioned this in the Safer Neighbourhood meeting about the fact that of the responses, only 9 were from a background of Black, African and Caribbean background, and because of the racial issues that stop and search has, we want to see whether that would be completely representative of young people across Hillingdon. But certainly it is surprising the fact that 60% of young people in Hillingdon wish to have more stop and search. Again, so many more things that you can see in the survey. So the reason that we took this survey is so that we can find out what the concerns are for young people and how we can fix those. What we want, and something we came up because I'm in the Hillingdon Youth Council, we have a group that focuses on knife crime, and we decided that we want this survey to be an annual survey. So what we're hoping for is that you can help, firstly in getting the best questions. So I'm sure that these are some great questions, but any input in those questions would be more than welcome. The second thing is something that we found very difficult was getting into schools, that there's not a lot of collaboration between schools and the youth council, and that's not just in this survey but in any election survey that we've ever done. It's very hard to get into schools, and because of that we don't always hear the voice of every young person that we can across Hillingdon. So if that's something that you can help us with, then I think that would be great. And if there's anything that I want to take out of this, is that how can we better collaborate with you and between the youth council and schools? I obviously any questions that you have, and you're more than welcome to. Yeah.
All right, thank you very much. You need to turn your mic off. Dan, in terms of access to schools in the borough between the youth council or youth parliament and the schools, how can we do that better?
Chairman, in terms of sort of activities that we provide in schools, just to pick up on the first point, and it was an interesting. I think actually I should say more generally the survey is very helpful, in terms of giving out the insight from young people into this obviously very significant issue that's facing young people in our communities. So in terms of activities, and I know through Jackie's team and working with the police and others that a whole range of activities are being provided in schools at the moment to raise awareness about the dangers of knife crime. And so, for example, and I forget how many schools that we're currently working with, secondary schools.
It's quite a lot. We're doing projects such as Your Life You Choose, which is going into a lot of the senior schools, and funding for that has been provided by the Safer Neighbourhood Board. Yeah.
So in terms of activities that we are providing a lot, and again through the Borough Commander's team locally, the Safer Schools officers are also attending schools with knife arches and also addressing the wider issues of risks that relate to getting involved in drug-related activities as well, where clearly there's been a lot of work to try to disrupt such activities as that clearly exposes young people to risk. I suppose in terms of how we might now that sounds like almost like a response that we've got this cracked, and it absolutely certainly isn't. And so I think it's in spite of everything that all partners are doing, including working closely with schools, we're all very worried about this issue, is what more can we do, but importantly, what is really effective. And I think there probably isn't a golden ticket to this very challenging issue, but it is about educating young people about the risks of getting involved in drug-related activities and the risks of carrying a knife. And I think it's also important to say that there's very strong evidence to say that young people who carry knives, some young people do so through fear rather than looking to be a perpetrator, carrying a knife to defend themselves, although clearly that's not recommended. So it's a very complex issue, and one we don't pretend that all partners around this table think that we've got cracked and have got the answers to. It needs continuous work, and it's an ongoing challenge.
I think that maybe what Mr. was trying to get at more was in terms of the reach of the youth parliament or the youth council to all the schools, because while this is a really good survey, as you acknowledge, the numbers aren't that high, and if this is going to be an annual event, for it to be even more powerful, it needs ever more participants. So I think it's more a question of the relationship between the youth council and the schools and getting that going, so that the root of this is finding out the sort of issues, and I appreciate what Mr. says about the questions, and we can work on that together. But the root of this is finding out what young people are feeling and thinking and doing. So the answer is to have many, many more participants in the survey, so we get a much better handle on what the hopefully vast majority of the young people in the borough are thinking of at school age. So, question, and I don't say you can answer it immediately now, but certainly for us to think about as a council, is how do we help the youth council get a good reach, get a good relationship with all the schools, so that the schools understand that what they're trying to do is get a good response, so that the actual result of the survey can then be used by the Youth Council, by the Council, in order to improve things as far as this particular subject is concerned, and others.
We can certainly help with that through the local authority, because of the contact we have with head teachers, with governing bodies as well. And I think it's great that the survey's being conducted, even though there perhaps hasn't been, as higher level of involvement. What's great is that it has nevertheless flushed out and brought to the surface some very important views. But we can certainly work with the Youth Parliament and schools to increase take-up and participation in the survey.
I mean, one thing that does occur to me is that we all know, many of us are school governors of different types of schools, that there are training events for governors and for chairman of governors. And what might be interesting would be at one of those training sessions to have Musa or one of his colleagues come along or go along to school governor training days and just do a session on the advisability of schools getting their pupils at whatever age range it is that you're looking at to be involved. And if it came from the governing body through the head, because there's lots of different training for governors. So if there was a way of getting into that sector to promote what the Youth Council are doing, that would be a very direct way of getting in.
Chairman, we'll certainly put that down as an action to follow up with the Youth Council, Youth Parliament.
All right, thank you. Right, Councillor Dennis.
Thank you. When the meeting started, I'm a member of the Independent Advisory Group, but I'm there as an independent member, not a council member. All right.
Councillor Dennis.
Yeah, I mean, this is a big, important issue. And, I'm Councillor for East Coast and East Ruislip, and a few weeks ago we had a stabbing which thankfully wasn't fatal, but was very shocking to our community, and I think I'll ask Chief Superintendent Peter Gardner a bit more about it later on. But at our last session with the police, we had a really interesting discussion actually with the officer who attended about stop and search and bringing it back and how it's changed compared to obviously the negative aspects of it that happened when it was previously used. And for me, definitely one of the things that jumped out of the survey very much was the support for stop and search. And of course, I completely understand that this is a great survey for stimulating discussion and building on it, and to get a more representative sample later would be brilliant. But having this in itself to sort of tease out those issues is very important. And I noticed one of the comments says more stop and search in brackets not racist, and because obviously that was one of the previous criticisms of it, that it was used to target minority groups unfairly. Now, my perception is that obviously being stop and search is not very nice, but being stabbed is even worse. And if we are in a situation where carrying knives seems to be something that's crept into more normal behaviour, then ultimately harder measures in order to resolve this situation are probably worth doing. So I suppose a question after that sort of statement to you, Musa. I mean, if stop and search is something that could be a valuable tool, how do you think it should work, or how do you think it can be accountable to those who are stopped and searched? Because ultimately, in order for anything to work, in the community or the communities who are being policed need to make sure that they sort of buy into what's happening.
Well, I personally don't think necessarily more stop and search will solve the issue. But if we are going to go down the route of more stop and search, then firstly we need a better relationship between communities and the police. And I think building those bridges between the police and communities is something that's really important, and actually this is something that was commented in the survey. But I personally feel that more opportunities for young people, I think, is a better route than harsher measures like stop and search.
All right, Councillor Mather.
Thank you. Can I just...
Yeah, go on.
Sorry. Can I just thank you for your work and the contribution that you and your colleagues at Youth Council have made towards informing us. I think it's really, really important that you hear that regardless of how many people participate, and I'm sure you'll find many more, this is really valuable, and that youth voice is extremely important. I just wanted to reflect on some of the answers that young people came across in terms of how might the police get, what was the exact question, do more to prevent, and how might there's one other question on this, here we go. What would prevent young people from carrying a knife? Some of the answers is around youth programmes and youth youth services. And I know that there was an all-party parliamentary group last year that recognised that the loss of youth clubs had made a contribution towards knife crime. And in Hillingdon, we've lost nearly 80% of our universal youth service. I mean, that is one way, maybe through Dan's department, through the universal youth service, the sports offer. There might be another way to reach young people with surveys. But I just wonder if there was any more in-depth kind of analysis you can add to that, or how much young people have spoken about having positive alternatives to carrying knives alongside education.
Well, yeah, youth services is certainly a big issue. I'm not sure if I've got any more analysis on that, but certainly from the people that I've spoken to, the need for more youth services is vital. And then the fact that 80% of youth services have shut down is quite alarming. And so I think if that's something that the council can look into opening up more youth services, targeting specifically people that are vulnerable to knife crime, then I think that would be absolutely great. Yeah.
All right, Chief Superintendent. First of all, welcome to this meeting, and thank you for coming. Obviously, we'll come on to specific questions for you later, but I think you would like to make a comment or two.
Yes, thank you very much, and again, please accept my apologies for being slightly late to come. Just a couple of comments just on what you said there. Firstly, thank you for the survey. I think it's insightful for us also, because we often find it difficult to reach youth, which I think is part of the problem that you're highlighting. We have each secondary school has a dedicated named officer associated with that school. So I think the ability, and those officers are trained in delivering knife crime education. So that is certainly, it's quite concerning for me, if I'm honest, to hear that you're not receiving that, or you feel you're not receiving that, because that's certainly one of our objectives to deliver that. So I will look into that, and thank you for highlighting that. I think part of the education issue is actually educating people before they make that leap from junior school into senior school, that year 6, year 7 transition, and that's where we are going to be focusing some of our education issues going forward, is pre that leap. The other comment I'd just like to make around stop and search, and I don't want to repeat the discussion that you've had previously. It is an incredibly powerful tool, but it's one we have to use sensitively, right? So I think nobody resents being stopped and searched if it's done in a proper manner, with respect, and treating the person as an individual rather than prejudging them as a criminal. And that's what we're putting a lot of effort into. We recognize that with the increase in stop and search, it's important that we don't allow it to become something that falls into what we've had in the past, which is real issues around public confidence and perception through the use of stop and search. So we are doing a lot more stop and search. The numbers that we do have shot up considerably. In Hillingdon alone, in the month of January, we did just under 700 stop and searches, and about a quarter of those, 26%, were actually positive outcomes. So what we call a positive outcome is when we actually find something on somebody when we're stopping and searching them. So effectively 1 in 4 of the stops that we do on Hillingdon are a positive outcome, which means we're stopping the right people. About 70% of those are for drugs, or 60 to 70% are for drugs, and weapons and knives, etc. But further down that, so we are doing significantly more stop and search. If you look at the upward trend, it's quite considerably higher across all the boroughs, including Hillingdon.
All right, thank you. Councillor Allen, just...
Thank you for this, much needed. When the SNTs were first set up, and we had a full complement, they worked in the community and they engaged with young people, and we had the youth service and the outreach workers, and then all that disappeared, and shortage of staff. Now we've got one PCSO and one policeman, and 34.5 hours, and that's all they can do. Now, somewhere along the line, something's got to be done, because, I speak to youngsters in Townfield, and some of them are scared. You wonder why mental health problems, where children stay in their bedrooms, because they're fearful of going outside. So I would like this council, and when you get your new complement of the police service, to actually start engaging with the youngsters. It's not your fault that you're not. There's just not enough of you. But hearing from Musa, it is concerning me now, and how far down the track, what has to happen before all of a sudden the red light goes on and someone says, we need that youth service back, and we need those outreach service back, and we need a full complement of the police back.
All right, just before you do that, Councillor Modia.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Musa. You're very hardworking, and you're an excellent example for your generation. Something that I often wonder about is the causes of crime, and I think about these in three broad groups. So you have the state, you have schools, police, youth centres, and knife awareness courses. And then you've got society, which is a second group. So society would be what young people see and experience when they're out and about, what they see their peers doing, what they see other people of their age doing. And then the third group is the home environment. That's parents, family structures, family breakdowns, positive or negative role models, and quality of parenting. And there are people out there who would say that you could have all the police, all of the money in the schools, all of the knife awareness courses. You could open up all the youth centres, but in the face of what is going on in people's individual homes, it's no use. I don't have an opinion on this because I'm not part of your generation, and I don't really know what's going on for young people today. So you're not expected to answer the question, but I would be interested to hear what your thoughts are about how these different factors or groups of influences are affecting the the likelihood of young people to affect crime. How much, what is the balance between all those different things?
Well, certainly all those issues are very important. Again, crime is an issue that will happen no matter what you do. The issue is, can we reduce crime? And I think investing in youth services, investing in education, in opportunities, will reduce crime. On issues of issues at home, and those are issues that I wouldn't say can't be solved, but certainly you're not going to solve everything. And so I think the things that we can do, I think we should do.
All right. Lapia, you were indicating quite a long time ago, and I intended to come to you.
Yeah. My name's Lakbir Rendawa, and I'm the lead for the Hillingdon Youth Council. I just wanted to reiterate what Musa did say at one stage, that although there was only 68 participants in that knife crime survey that was done locally, within Hillingdon we have got the Make Your Mark vote results, and there was, as he said, 55%, but there was 2,588 young people within Hillingdon that did say that that was their biggest concern. And we've got these results, and they're per school. And one thing that concerns us, or I'm trying to build on, is the fact that there's only 7 schools there, and there's a lot more schools. I just wanted to point that out, that although that survey was low numbers, we have got the figures for each school and what and how the young people voted within those schools. Thank you.
Chief Senator, you wanted to come in?
Yes, thank you. Sorry, I just wanted to respond to your point, if I may. I think it would be unfair to say we don't engage with young people. I think I recognise that we've changed our structure and we don't have the officer numbers that we used to have on neighbourhood teams. I definitely recognise that, but there's an awful lot of activity that we do have with young people, not only through our schools officers, but through our cadets. We've secured MOPAC funding for football and boxing clubs to engage with young people. So if I can just I think we do our very best to engage with young people, albeit I acknowledge that we don't have the officer numbers that we used to have on neighbourhood teams.
No, because I'm going to go to other people first, and then we'll come back. Councillor Dennis and then Councillor Arlen.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to go back onto the youth services point, as Councillor Mavis has pointed out. You know, the traditional view that I have of youth services, which is obviously extremely dated and black and white, but is, you know, a room with a pool table and maybe a football pitch and all this sort of stuff. Now, my understanding of the situation is those types of youth services actually have a lot less people using them. Because basically, I suppose young people want to do different things, and I know that we are investigating, you know, how to approach and provide youth services that young people want. But I just wondered, has the Youth Council actually looked into this, or do you have any ideas about, you know, what would you like us to do as youth services in order to connect with you and provide things for you?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying about the lack of usage of youth services. There are many things that we think that are important. One of them that I mentioned before is the youth entrepreneurship program, and that's getting young people into business from an early age. And the thinking behind that is that, seeing as that we have a lot of young people that get into drugs because of a lack of opportunity, the idea that instead of using those skills for that and using it for things that would not only be a benefit to them but be a benefit to wider society, I think if we were to delve into that, I think that would be something that would be, I think, very beneficial. But there are many other things that we could work on. We can work on investment in schools and boxing further than that been said before. And I'm sure that there's many things that young people want to do that the council can look into. And I think that's maybe one thing that we can put on the survey is what young people want to see invested in, what youth services they want to see that money go into so that they can participate in that. So, yeah.
I think what we'll do in terms of that, and you mentioned it before, helping with formulation of the questions, we can spin. Well, we've all got it anyway, but we'll ask the various members of this committee to look again at the survey and look at the questions as opposed to the answers, which is what we were concentrated on before, and see if there are any other, as Councillor Dennis just mentioned, any other questions that we can suggest to you for another time. All right, Councillor Arnold.
Thanks, Chairman. Well done. Great piece of work. I understand that you'd like a wider range of ethnicity to reflect. Personally, I'd be slightly more worried about the male-female split in the survey results. My understanding is it tends to be, not always, but tends to be young males that commit knife crime, not so much young females. maybe you'll correct me if I'm wrong, and therefore I think that's the balance that you need to try and work on this when you keep rolling it out. The question I had, Councillor Dennis already asked, so thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Allen.
Right, firstly, I apologise if I came across wrong, because not for a second was I saying you didn't do the best you can with the staff you've got. What I was saying is you did so much better, to my understanding, before, because you were able to be a lot more engaging with the public. We talked earlier about, when you said about family life and everything else. My concern is those youngsters who are hard to reach. The child whose parents have got the wherewithal to send them, to give them the bus fare to go here, there and everywhere, is honest. The child who is out there, who's got no money in his pocket, got nowhere to go, no youth facilities, they're the kids that really worry me. And they're the kids that we should be out there dealing with, because we've heard, and when I've spoken to youngsters about carrying knives, they've said they carry them for protection. They don't want to use them. They are scared that they are going to be, and I've pointed out to them, you carry a knife, where does it stop? But I think that's where a lot of work's got to be done. And we talked about police liaison in the schools. Can I ask you, Musa, when was the last time a police officer came, or a policewoman, or a PCSO came into your school and actually talked to you about issues?
I think only once, maybe twice, I can't quite remember, quite a long time ago, in an assembly for about 10 minutes, a police officer came in and spoke to us about knife crime. The problem with that was that it wasn't very engaging. I obviously respect the work that the police do, and the time that they have, but it was in an assembly. It was once, and I think a lot of it, probably young people weren't really listening because it was for 10 minutes and it wasn't that engaging. And so I think more engagement between the police and young people, and actually making the workshops that they do engaging, I think is important. Yeah.
One thing we can do, we may want to think about, but this committee can set up a subcommittee or a working group to look into very specific issues. We've already got one on the go at the moment, or about to be on the go at the moment. But it may be that the next one that we look at could be around knife crime, because it's not going to go away. And if that's the case, then we can involve the Youth Council in that, because we can ask anybody to get to be on one of these working groups who really drill down into a particular issue, a very tiny, important but very detailed issue. So that may be something that we can look at as a working group topic for later on. All right. Yes.
Yeah, I think I just want to say that what you've just said is really good, because the one thing that I see is that there's a lot of people trying to do a lot of things to try and solve this. But what I always say is they don't seem to be joined up. So having lots of people together and then having a united effort, this thing is too complicated, and there is no silver bullet. But I think, given where we are, it's for us adults not to say we can't do anything about it. It's too much. We've got to do what we can.
All right, Councillor Mather.
Thank you. I would and we would completely welcome this subcommittee. But I suppose the one point, and then one reflection before I make a point, if I may. Just the sadness that I had when I read that actually when it came around education and training for knife crime, young people ask for first aid training. Just that idea that they're there when it's too late. And I wouldn't want any young person in Hillingdon to ever feel that that the solutions that we're looking for collectively are ones where we just give you the sticking plaster or the first aid when someone's been a victim, as opposed to trying to prevent that victim or that crime in the first place. So I really do pass back, if I may, just pass back that we're looking to prevent victims of knife crime. And yes, first aid is important, but hopefully there'll be other education that can shine through to boost the morale and the empowerment of young people. My point was around there were a few young people that there's a few young people that said they've witnessed crime and they would report it. And I suppose drawing in Chief Super, if I may, just the reporting of crime for young people. Were there any points that young people made around the ease of reporting of crime and how they felt the experience of reporting a crime was to encourage them to do more? And also, is there any work the police are doing to ensure that young victims, of which young people are very often the victim of crime, to improve the ways in which crime can be reported, or it can be promoted that young people report crime?
So we've invested considerably in online reporting now, which I think is probably a lot easier for young people than perhaps it is for some of our older residents. So we do have an online portal now where people can report their crime directly over the online portal, and it's really straightforward to do so. The other thing is we still, for those who don't wish to obviously identify themselves in reporting of crime, we still work very closely with Crime Stoppers, and that is always an option that's available 24/7. So if somebody doesn't feel confident either speaking to us, because we have had issues with the 101, which is the phone system, that's why we've got the online portal now, which is really straightforward. It's extremely easy for someone to report a crime on that. But then again, if someone has concerns about identifying themselves and wishes to remain anonymous, they go through Crime Stoppers, and we will never find out who's made that report, but it can come directly into us. And then Crime Stoppers will pass through the report to ourselves, and we can act off the back of it.
Catherine.
When I sat on the domestic violence panel many years ago, we did a little booklet with numbers on, and I'm just reminded when we're talking about young people not wanting to ring 999, is there a number that young people can ring that they can talk to someone who's dedicated to youth? Because that might, if the youngster doesn't feel confident, 999 or 101, then if there was a number they could ring that all kids of school age knew, that number they could ring to talk to someone in confidence or to report something that they might not want to report through other channels.
I think Crime Stoppers is the best example of that. They are trained up, their telephone operators are trained up to speak to young people, as well as people who are in the midst of crises, etc. And we regularly publish the Crime Stoppers number on all of our literature. So when you see our crime awareness campaigns, they don't just include the Met contact details, they always include the Crime Stopper details also.
Thank you.
All right. As you can see, we've spent quite a bit of time on this because we think it's really important, and we think your survey is excellent. It's just bringing things to a close for the moment at this meeting. Is there anything further that you want to add or say as a consequence of what you've heard so far?
Well, obviously, just thank you for taking the interest in this, and hopefully we can work together and collaborate together in the future. Yeah, but not much after that. Yeah.
All right. Well, in the absence of anything further and specific, thank you very much indeed. It was really great, and we will definitely follow this up. All right. Okay. Thank you. All right. We'll move on then, and Jackie, we've got your report, and then we'll come on to Chief Superintendent Gardner for a number of questions or additional questions.
Thank you. Jackie Robertson, Service Manager for Community Safety here at the London Borough of Hillingdon. You should have in front of you a revised performance scorecard for the Safer Hillingdon Partnership priorities. A direction of travel comparing quarter-on-quarter performance has been provided, and using a straight line projection, a RAG rating has also been provided for anticipated annual performance. Now, what I propose to do is to give you some highlights that relate probably to themes 1 and 2, and partially into 3, where the RAG rating is red. So for theme 1, which relates to burglaries, there have been 491 residential burglaries in quarter 2. So we're looking at the time period July to September 2019. Taking a straight line for the first 8 months and projecting this across the year suggests that performance will exceed the target, given a RAG rating of red. So the direction of travel is currently shown as increasing by 6.7% between the 2 quarters. The next one, which is reducing non-residential burglary by 1% per annum for the next 3 years. So in relation to that, there have been 119 non-residential burglaries in quarter 2. The trends across the quarter indicates a positive direction of travel and a decrease of 7.8%. The straight line projection, however, suggests that performance over the year will still be given a red RAG rating. Going on to theme 2 then, in relation to reducing violence and violence with injury, that stands at 667 in quarter 2. This is an increase of 11.2% since quarter 1. If the rates of violence with injury continue to increase each quarter, the straight line projection suggests that performance over the year will exceed the target value, therefore again given a red RAG rating. Looking at violence without injury, that stands at 1,219 in quarter 2. The quarter 2 target for this indicator is 1,100. Performance at the last quarter was much higher at 1,664 and has seen a decrease of 26.7% in quarter 2. However, the straight line projection suggests that performance will go over and therefore give a red RAG rating. Personal property robbery. The target for this measure is 156 incidents per quarter. Performance as at quarter 2 was slightly below at 151. Projecting over the year suggests an outturn of 664 against an annual target of 622, again producing a red RAG rating. Business property robbery. The quarterly target for this measure is 18 incidents per quarter. Whilst quarter 1 performance was in line with the target, quarter 2 there were 33 incidents, has seen performance already exceed the target set. Based on this, the direction of travel has set at deteriorating performance, while the projection for the year also indicates the performance being higher than the target set. Knife crime with injury occurred 23 times in quarter 2. This is a reduction of 21% compared with quarter 1 of 29. Based on the current projections, this service should hit the target for the year. If we then go on to maintaining the current level of recorded violence against a person, recorded against young people receiving a criminal justice disposal, the quarter for this indicator is 18. quarter one performance at 19 was marginally higher. However, quarter two performance has seen a further deterioration to 23 recorded incidents. Based on a projection over the year, a similar rate of performance would see the target not being met. Going on then to theme 3, reducing ASB and raising confidence. Quarter two has seen 2,617 antisocial behaviour incidents reported to the police, which is an increase of 11% compared to quarter one, where 2,353 incidents were reported. This also exceeds quarter one and quarter two target of 1,947. So based on the projection for the year, the outturn would be circa 9,940, exceeding the annual target by 28%. There were 352 incidents of community and neighbourhood nuisance for quarter two, which is a 20.5% increase from quarter one, where 292 occurred. A similar trajectory of performance over the year will see the service miss the annual target by approximately 19.8%. Fly tipping has seen an increase of 23.6% between quarter two and quarter one, which was 263. The outturn for this measure for 18-19 was 930. Based on this, the target for 19-20 was 883. Performance for the first two quarters stands at 588. Projecting forward suggests that by the end of quarter four, the total number of incidents should stand at 1,176, which is 33.2% higher than the 883 target for the year. And then just going on to theme 4, which is tackling and preventing domestic abuse, violence against women and girls. The number of repeat cases that has seen a quarterly increase, albeit marginal, and a forecast performance for the year, 22%, is likely to be below the target of a minimum of 28%.
All right, thank you. Do you want to turn off that? Against the background of those figures is undoubtedly a feeling that we get from our residents in terms of what they tell us in surgeries and other interactions with them, that since the introduction of the new policing system, that Hillingdon has somewhat been left behind. And some of these figures seem to bear that out, and in particular one of the biggest concerns that residents have is in regard to residential burglary. And we note that in quarter one for 2019-20, 456, rising in quarter two to 491, which is a very considerable rise if when compared to 18-19, where there was a reduction in quarter 1-2, which seems to have been something of an anomaly, because the 17-18 there was a rise also from 329 to 429, but this most recent rise has been significant, and it underpins a very considerable concern on the part of residents in regard to residential burglary, which was demonstrated, if it needed to be done so, by the extraordinary attendance at an event that Councillor Raja was largely responsible for putting together, where many of our residents came along to hear about burglary prevention, and 300 came along to hear about burglary prevention and various issues and the ways in which the police and others were working to prevent burglary. As I say, it underpins a general feeling of residents in Hillingdon being concerned about resource deployment and policing generally in this borough as opposed to the other two boroughs in our tri-borough arrangement. So is that something that, looking at the figures and looking at the practices as they are now, that looking at them as far as you are concerned, that is the way that these figures are giving answers to?
Yes, that is the general feeling that we're hearing too.
It may be that, Chief, you want to come in on that. Of course, we well understand that the fear about crime and concerns about crime is very often out of kilter with perhaps what's actually going on in terms of reported crime. But it may be that you understand this already, but there are these concerns around how things are now, and we'll come on to this perhaps in more detail later, but perhaps you'd care to make some comments around that.
So certainly around burglary, so on a 12-month rolling basis in Hillingdon, burglary is up quite considerably. It's up just on 26% at the moment on a 12-month rolling basis. That's looking against the period last term. So when it came in October, the team had been working on, and we've now implemented a burglary and robbery squad, so a separate squad to focus purely on our burglary and robbery offenders. Since we've launched that, we're now convicting double the percentage of offenders that we were previously, and we're starting to see the benefits of that. So there's an awful long way that we still have to go, but from effectively a comparative increase of over 25%, it's starting to come down. So when I look at it on the 3 months, most recent 3 months against most recent 3 months in the previous year, because of the seasonality, you have to compare it against the year previously, because obviously darker nights you get more burglaries. So the 3 months over the 3 months the previous year, we had burglary up 6%. So we're starting to see the benefits of that. And then comparing our most recent month against the same period last year, it's down 26%. So we are starting to see the impact of that, but it's a long way away from where we need to be. So it is a focus of ours. I know that the residents feel very strongly about it. It is one of our objectives. So that the success that we've had from that burglary and robbery squad, that squad is a permanent squad now. So that will be continued through the year.
Are those squads that are based in the borough?
The proactive team are based out of Southall, and the burglary and robbery squad's based out of Acton Police Station. And
I mean, it may be that issue comes up in questioning later, but the geographical siting of these squads, given Hillingdon's geography being a fairly lengthy borough, as it were, is that not an operational problem, having the squads quite so far away in terms of Hillingdon? Because obviously we're concerned about Hillingdon.
I don't think it's an issue at all. What we have to remember is that primary investigation is done by the response team, which is based out of Uxbridge Police Station. So what we're talking around here is secondary investigation, and the forensics team is based out of Ruislip Police Station. So in terms of the initial response to burglary and the forensics opportunities, which is where we get most of our convictions from, those teams are actually based on this borough. The team that's based out of Acton are doing the secondary investigations. So once we get the prisoners in, they are taking it through court, etc. And given our main custody suite is at Acton, that's where the prisoners are taken for these offences anyway. That makes sense. So I don't think it's something that inhibits our response to burglary on the borough at all.
Councillor Allen.
Just a quick one. We've got this sheet in front of us. Have you had any access to the other boroughs to look at the same issues before you compare? Do you understand what I'm saying? You've given us these, and you've made a point of saying you believe since the changes were made, you have seen a big difference. But have you actually had sight of the other boroughs' performance sheets as well? And is it possible that we could have them so that we could see for ourselves whether that's gone up or down?
Certainly across the West area, what we've received at the Safer Hillingdon Partnership Board is the crime stats that have been described, presented in such a way that we can see our own area compared to the two other areas in our West area basic command unit. So, I think it's probably fair to say that in general, Hillingdon remains a lower crime rate area than the two other areas in our patch. It's probably fair to say.
That would be accurate. I think what we've seen in Hillingdon is a greater increase in burglary than the other areas, but we've seen a significantly the proportion the other way around in other crime areas like robbery, etc. We've seen much higher incidence of that in some of the other boroughs. So obviously Hillingdon is going to be more susceptible to burglary given the residential area, the higher value of properties and the fast roads coming through. So if you look at the demographics of the area, that would support that also. But I wouldn't say, what I really want to assure everybody is that the perception that one area is favoured over the other is absolutely wrong. So each area has dedicated response teams that work out of those areas. So there's one at Ealing for Ealing, there's one at Hounslow for Hounslow, there's one at Uxbridge for Hillingdon. We're not pulling those resources out unless it's a critical incident and we need to flex our resources across. So the service hasn't changed, and the performance of myself and my team and how we held to account by both MOPAC and by our superiors is not based on any one borough over the other. It's based on the performance across all the boroughs. So I just want to, make everyone very assured that we're not. There's this perception that we're favouriting one borough over another is absolutely incorrect.
Maybe put in specialist resources where they're needed, as opposed to just sharing it out.
No, absolutely. So we have core teams that work each borough, but we have specialist teams that need to go where we're having our greater incidence of crime. So what we'll have is we have hotspots identified, and Hillingdon, is definitely a burglary hotspot in some parts of Hillingdon, particularly around Uxbridge South, Botwell, Heathrow Villages. We know we've got issues around there. So when we put our proactive units on, our additional units, which are trying to do the preventative work, they're going into those areas. So they would be targeting those areas for burglary over areas on the other BCUs, but they'll be targeting, say, Ealing Broadway, for example, for knife crime over some other areas of Hillingdon.
All right, Councillor Arnold.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I just go back to this sheet? There was something that, I don't know if it's me or the maths, but on theme 2, where you talk about the increase in stop and search, whether it be drugs, weapons, or other categories, it then says it's decreased, yet the numbers on some of them seem to reflect that it's increased, and on others, do you see where I'm talking there? I'm presuming that the idea is that we're doing more stop and searches on that.
Yes, that's correct.
But it says drug stop and searches have decreased by 33%, weapons by 18%, and other reasons by 50%. Yet the figures, particularly on stop and search, seems to have increased. Is that just a typo, or do you...
Searches are up from the police statistics.
If I may. The only dip we had was in April last year when Extinction Rebellion came out, because we had a lot of officers off borough dealing with Extinction Rebellion the first time round. We were better prepared the second time round. So the only dip we had last year in terms of performance was around Extinction Rebellion, and then we had a dip in December, but the stop and search we've done in January is the highest we've ever done on the borough, so it's definitely increasing.
And so if I could just expanding on that, could you give a bit of background into what the sort of officers you've got on probation, if you're fully staffed, that sort of, as you've touched on, sort of deployment?
So at the moment I'm carrying just under 4% vacancies across the board. We're carrying 44 vacancies in the neighbourhoods team, which is our highest number of vacancies, and we're carrying about 30 vacancies across response. I expect all of those vacancies to be filled by the end of the year. At the moment, in the current 12-month cycle, we've got 275 new officers coming to us as a BCU. So not only will that make our vacancies good, we'll also be getting an uplift to focus on violent crime, which is through the increased funding we got from both. This is the first tranche of funding which is coming from MOPAC. The second part of funding which comes from the uplift, where those officers, that's the 5,000 to 6,000 officers that the government's promised, where those officers are going, we don't have clarity yet, but we will be getting an uplift. West area, between the three boroughs, we've got the second highest number of officers in the Met. So the only borough that's got more than us is Westminster cluster, because obviously they've got the additional risk around the security zone and the Palace of Westminster. So I expect by the end of the year to all our vacancies to be filled and to have that uplift. We're carrying about between 30 and 40% probationer on our response teams at the moment. We don't carry probationers on our neighbourhoods roles, and we don't carry probationers in our investigative roles apart from direct entry detectives, which is how we're trying to increase the detective pool. So one of our challenges is, with 275 officers coming in and possibly more over this cycle, is getting them up to speed. So we've actually invested 15 officers and 2 sergeants into a street duty stream to give our probationers additional on-the-ground training. So the way that it's likely to work is that these officers will come in, they'll do their time at Hendon, which is 4 months. They'll then go into 8 weeks of street duties, where they'll be brought up to speed on, local issues around the boroughs, etc., and local policing. We then, before they then go onto the teams that they're going to be joining in the long run, we're actually putting them onto 8 weeks of tasking. So one of the challenges we've had is we haven't had a significant visible presence of policing because of all the units. So what we'll have now is a significant taskable asset of circa 30 to 40 officers that will be able to task to hotspots like our burglary hotspots around the boroughs. So that's kind of where we are from a staffing perspective at the moment.
Thank you. That was a very detailed answer. Just on that as well, can you just talk a little bit about retention?
So our retention internally is more to other parts of the Met than issues officers going to the counties. We obviously, with the uplift here, we also have an uplift across the board in terms of our policing, and I think where we've probably lost more officers as a BCU than perhaps some of the others is the armed uplift, which has impacted Heathrow quite considerably, and obviously officers based this side generally tend to live this side, so we have lost, so we say, proportionately more than some of the other BCUs to Heathrow to the armed uplift. Personally, I think it's a good thing if officers are moving around the Met, because they're gathering that experience, and it gives our officers something to drive towards. But we're also getting experienced officers coming into us also.
Thank you. That was an incredibly good answer. Thank you very much. All right, thank you. Councillor Mather.
Thank you. Excuse me for being unfamiliar with the scrutiny around the scorecard. So I suppose my question is, there's 2 parts really. Why no targeting is applied in some areas, such as awareness and reporting, and kind of how that works? And the other aspect is it usual to have this many red RAG ratings? So I make it 11 out of 19 RAG ratings are red, and kind of how does that compare to kind of year on year with these courses?
In response to some of the, maybe take the second question first. So in terms of target setting, I mean, we always, in terms of presenting those targets to the Safer Hillingdon Partnership Board each year, we take on board what the trends have been over the last 3 years, and also set some realistic but obviously ambitious targets. And I suppose what the reds reflect here are some of the challenges that we've heard the Borough Commander describe, which arguably over a longer period of time could be described as spikes, and hopefully they're not longer term trends. And therefore the sort of targeted response, such as the dedicated burglary squad, will hopefully they'll reverse those and bring them back to where they need to be. In terms of, I suppose, those areas where we haven't set targets, the honest answer is that in terms of, I suppose, knowing what good looks like, in terms of what threshold that is, some of them are newer targets, and we've wanted them to bed down for a year or even 18 months before we even start to set something that looks realistic, rather than set something that actually is unachievable or just completely unrealistic. So it is something we will be coming back to as a partnership board, but based on, I suppose, a longevity that allows us to see what good looks like.
All right, Councillor Allen.
We've heard about all the new staff coming in. Can you tell me how long it will be before all wards will be up to full capacity with their SNT teams?
The SNT team, the SNT teams are a priority, so we have an obligation to fill those first. So when the officers start coming in, we already have an we're already advertising internally at the moment for experienced officers to come across into the DWO teams. So that process is underway at the moment. So we've already appointed some. I expect that to be completed in the next couple of months.
And my other question is, how many of the new staff that are coming in will be backroom as opposed to frontline staff?
These are all frontline staff. These are all going onto the front line. Yes. Yeah.
Councillor Dennis.
Thank you. I want to move away from the statistics a little bit to talk about basically the incident that happened in East Coast a few weeks ago, because I think it actually has a wider question about communities having confidence in policing. So for those of you who aren't aware, a few weeks ago there was a stabbing in Eastcote, and luckily or thankfully the young gentleman who was stabbed wasn't fatally stabbed, but it was an incident that I think created a lot of fear, I suppose, in the community where I represent, and it's partly because of how it was done. I mean, it was late-ish in the evening on a Wednesday or Thursday evening, I think, and two people, I think, had stabbed this one gentleman, and he'd gone into a restaurant in order to try and find some safety. Now, the two people who were chasing him and had stabbed him stood outside the restaurant with their faces covered, waving the knives at the people inside the restaurant, and then sort of ran away as if this was, well, hey, this is what we do in this area, which obviously shocked the people who were sitting in the restaurant. To wind back a bit, within Eastcote is a very nice area, and I have a young family, and I really enjoy living there. But definitely over the last couple of years, people in the community have noticed the increase in sales of drugs and drug dealing and drug taking. And when this has been brought to the attention of police, and we've discussed it in our safer neighbourhood panels, really talk has happened, but talk also has happened about what can't be done. Now, we don't know what happened or why the stabbing happened, but there's a strong suspicion that essentially this was an argument over drug dealing in the local area. Now, there is a lack of confidence, I suppose, that policing, well, when people see in areas like Eastcote increase in drug dealing, drug dealers who basically don't seem to be worried about being caught, then it leads to stabbings on our doorstep, people waving knives, again, don't seem to be worried about being caught. That leads to a lack of confidence in, what is happening on our streets. Now, I suppose I'm just laying it out there as a sort of big issue for us. I mean, what can be done about this?
So violence, as you know, is our key priority, and it's also the government's key priority. The link between drug dealing, the open drugs market, and violence is well established. So the work we do around drugs-related violence is critical to, making this area safe. So do I sit here and think that's okay? Absolutely not. There's no way people should feel comfortable that they can deal drugs without being arrested, or without, or feel comfortable that they can, or confident enough they can wave a knife outside a restaurant and intimidate people. Absolutely not. There's no place for that in in the society. So there are significant steps that we're taking around drug-related violence and around violence in general. So when we increase our officer numbers, which we're doing at the moment, a significant proportion of officers over and above our current strength is going into violence suppression units. So if I can just sort of paint the picture of what we're doing. So at the moment, we have our local policing teams in terms of what they do in the BCU. We then have the Violent Crime Task Force, which was established with MOPAC money. I think it was 100 million that was initially set up to establish. The Violent Crime Task Force is now moving into 4 syndicates across London. So each syndicate will be working across sort of 3 BCUs. The way they work will be quite different. They're going to embed with us in a BCU and target our high harm offenders around violence, particularly our open drugs market. So that's the one area which is quite different to how we've approached those problems in the past. In the past, we've used VCTF somewhat similar to a big stick, like they will go out there and we'll put all the officers out when we have a major incident or want to do a Section 60 or something like that. So the way we're using that is changing quite considerably. The second thing is we are going to get an uplift of officers. How many, I can't say. Will be in excess of 50 onto the BCU, purely focused on violence suppression. They're calling it the violence suppression team. So these officers, a small proportion of it, sort of circa, I would assume about 10 or so, will be focused on fugitives, so offenders that are wanted for any sort of violent crime, any kind of PWITs, or possession with intent, drug dealing, etc. And the rest will be high visibility, suppression of open drugs market and violence. So those are steps we're taking locally. We've also successfully bid centrally to get the Territorial Support Group, the TSG, so they're coming across to the area from next month for a month, so they're going to be here helping suppress also. So what we would have struggled with in the past perhaps is getting central asset out to us, but there's a recognition now that there's only so many officers you can put into Westminster or Lambeth or places like that, and we are now seeing success in terms of our internal bidding process to get the right resources to us. But that is something that I agree with you. Your residents shouldn't have to feel like that. They shouldn't have to feel intimidated, and they shouldn't have to tolerate that on their doorstep.
Yeah, I think to make a very obvious statement, when criminals aren't scared, residents get scared, and obviously the stabbing incident was sort of a shocking peak to sort of what has been happening. But previously, up until then, there was this feeling that basically drug dealing was an issue that was too difficult for the police to deal with. And I know that is not correct, and I know from speaking to local officers that is not correct, but this peak seems to follow on from that underneath. Now, I think in order to regain confidence, really, that I mean, it only happens on really one strip in Eastcote. It's not everywhere in Eastcote, but there needs to be a feeling that those who are doing criminal activities are having, if they continue doing their criminal activities, at least they're having to work hard to do their drug dealing and to do that. And I don't think there is that feeling. So hopefully, from what you're saying, those resources going in will help areas like mine to see basically policing having a better fight against this sort of crime that's going on.
Yeah, completely agree. I want everybody who's intent on criminality on this borough looking over their shoulder all the time, if I'm honest. It's unacceptable that people feel that way. Just so you understand what we've done in terms of the local policing, so the West area officers, the 1,700 odd officers we have on the West area, I've given them just 2 priorities for this year. One is our offenders, and the other is our hotspots, right? So within that, we obviously prioritise by violence, etc., and robbery and burglary. But in some ways, I think what we do, as complex as it is, also a little bit simple. The more people we lock up, the bigger the impact we will have on crime. We know that burglars don't commit one burglary and then disappear. We know that they commit dozens and dozens of burglaries, and they'll keep doing so until they're locked up. So our focus is very much in those 2 areas. All our suspects, every effort must be made to lock these people up, and then every time that we have a minute to spare, I want our officers parking up in a hotspot. So even our response officers We've given them all sort of state-of-the-art tablets now, Panasonic Tough Books, which means they can put their crime report on from anywhere. So I'm telling them, I don't want you coming back to the police station. I want you to go and park up in our crime hotspot, even if you're just sitting there in your vehicle whilst you put your crime report on. You know, when somebody comes on the corner intent on doing harm, they're going to see your vehicle and think twice. But I completely agree. We can't have a situation where those intent on criminal, those who have criminal intent are not feeling scared about doing so.
Councillor Vardia.
When a prisoner is automatically released halfway through their sentence and they decide to come and live in Hillingdon, are the police aware of their presence, and do you have the resources that you need to survey the small number of the most dangerous criminals in Hillingdon?
Yes, on both accounts. So we get PINS releases, we get told who's coming, when they're being released. Generally, if they are a prolific offender, we will pay them a visit, and we'll just let them know that we are there. If they've got conditions on their, on their early release, we will be enforcing those conditions. So I would say yes on that account. In terms of our prolific offenders, across the entirety of the West area, we have 30 offenders at the moment that I would classify as prolific offenders. So these are either people like prolific burglars, habitual knife carriers. This is across the entirety of the West area. Every single one of those offenders have got a dedicated plan against them to get them in. Could we do with more resources? Of course we could. Everybody could. But that's not to say that means we're not targeting these people.
You need to understand that as far as this committee is concerned, our work programme is extremely busy, but the divide between our health responsibilities and our policing and safer neighbourhood responsibilities are not always exactly equal. So we end up having to ask a huge number of questions of our police colleagues at the very few meetings that we actually get to have them. Maybe we need to look at the balance a bit more. However, what I want to ask is really about operational things in a sense, across two fronts, one very specific and one more general. We hear a lot about the actual practicality of statement taking and statement taking over the phone. In terms of when crimes are reported and then obviously investigated and followed up. And there's a feeling in terms of the effectiveness of statement taking over the phone because it's remote and the capacity of officers to build up experience in dealing with people and reading people as they need to do when they're dealing with that, which is clearly lost when you're, I say just advisedly, over the phone with somebody. It's difficult to pick up on things, obviously, if you're not actually with them. Is that a practice that you favour or would want to look at? And is it something that you believe is prevalent as far as Hillingdon offences are concerned? Because, again, I know what you've said about the squads and so forth, but and I know what you said about Hillingdon not being left behind. But, again, part and parcel of this worry that people have is that some of the newer practices coming in look like it's because Hillingdon is being left behind. So in terms of statement taking on the telephone, what do you feel about that?
So firstly, if just to put into context, so we have crimes that our officers will deal with directly. So if we get a call in and says, I've just been burgled, etc., we will go to the scene. So all our officers are taking statements on a day-to-day basis on the ground. If we have, say, a burglary or robbery that's reported a few days later or it's reported via our online system or something like that, then we'll go into a central team that will take that report initially. It will then be given to ourselves. A crime assessment policy will be applied to that report. Are there forensics? Because this is what should come from the central team. They should have assessed whether there's forensics, whether there's CCTV, etc., etc. If that crime, the solvability factor is very low, we will probably give them a call and say, listen, we are going to close this crime. If anything else happens, we will then pick it up. But for those crimes that our officers attend, they're always taking statements of those crimes. Face to face. I encourage that. I think it's important. I think what's also a critical part of the statement taking is when we take a statement, at the end of the statement, we also take a victim impact statement. So it's part of so the person will say, this is what's happened, this is what I've seen, etc. But it's really important that we capture that last bit also, because that has a significant weight in terms of, when we take it forward through the judicial process.
And the other thing is back to burglary, I'm afraid, and indeed the teams. I just want to get a really detailed understanding about what you were saying earlier about the teams and where they're based in terms of the 3 boroughs. So there are specialist teams in Hillingdon, from what you were saying.
We've got a lot of officers based in Hillingdon. When you say specialist team, I'm not sure.
A burglary team in particular?
So the burglary and robbery investigations team, secondary investigations teams, works out of Acton Police Station, but they cover the entirety of the BCU. So they cover the secondary investigation. So this is after our response officers based in Hillingdon have already attended and said, there's an opportunity here for us to investigate this. We've got forensics, or we've got the possibility of something. Then they will come and take it over from there. We also have our scenes of crime officers, our forensic officers. They're based out of Ruislip also, and they'll come down and do that from there. Yeah.
And on a practical level, was the closure of the front of the desk at Uxbridge Police Station, was there an increase in crime around the building, around the immediate area? No, was there an increase in crime noticed as a consequence of the front desk not being manned?
Not as far as I'm aware, but I can look into that. I don't have it off my head, but it's certainly not something that someone's flagged up to me.
The other thing was about remote working. Again, part and parcel of the new system was very much highlighted in terms of officers remotely working. Some concerns about the practicality of, as it were, starting from somewhere to work each day. With the closure of police stations, not just around here, but of course across London, is that at this stage, it having worked for some time now, under review in any way to see what the effectiveness of remote working has been?
So most of our officers still start at a police station. So our neighbours' officers generally start at a police station and then go out from there. We did have issues with the technology. I will say that the first generation of tablets we gave our officers, I think the best thing you could do with them was throw them at a burglar, if I'm honest. I'm being flippant. They weren't quite that bad. But because of the work we did on the West area, we really promoted remote working and we're successful at it. We were the first BCU and the only BCU at the moment that's been given the next generation of devices. So the devices that we've got now are brilliant. They definitely fit for purpose. They've got all the technology and the apps on it we need. So in terms of working from a police station and having access to the right technology, so all skippers and above now have laptops, and all PCs and neighbours' officers have really next generation tablets. So we've got the technology right. We have them working for generally from police stations. We don't have enough fleet. We could always do with more vehicles. So sometimes, they're cycling, taking one of our police bikes. I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing if they're seen cycling down the road in their high-vis. And sometimes they take public transport again, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But we do have, fleet where it's needed to take them from A to B. In terms of the wider estate program, so the estates program, elements of it are being revisited in light of the uplift. Because obviously with more officers, you need more space to locate them. So what the outcome of that looks like, I can't tell you at this point in time, but I can say that as an organisation, that's been looked at Met-wide.
Just on that point, I'll come back to Councillor in a minute. Just on that point, of course, what one of the things that certainly this authority were looking at in conjunction with your former colleagues earlier on were the possibility of using existing buildings, libraries, possibly schools that didn't need certain buildings, that sort of thing, Of course, certain types of equipment need specialist places to store, but as being a place to work from, or being a place to go to and then work from, as it were, is that something that would be of assistance?
I think yes. All neighbourhood ward teams should be offering regular surgeries which are advertised, where officers can drop in, or where the members of the public can drop in and see the officers. So we recognise that it's impractical for a lot of people to get to a front counter, and so the idea of having those drop-in sessions is that the public can come and speak to their local officer then and there. So it is useful having those places where they can drop in and hold the surgery, and people can come and speak to them about various things. So we've done that in the town centre quite recently, and we do it in various other places. So yeah, it's definitely useful.
Councillor Riley.
I'll start by saying the last time I asked, I was told exactly 8 people had used the front office at Uxbridge Police Station, which I don't think is a very good use of services. Ward surgeries in Townfield, I know they happen. They happen in Sainsbury's, the library. My concern is safe neighbourhood meetings, and I'd like you to take this back. We've been unable, the councillors for Townfield have been unable to attend any meetings for some months now, because try as we might say to a PCSO that we can't make a certain night because it's a full council night, that meeting, that date still pops up, and then we get a message to say, unfortunately, the meeting couldn't go ahead because the councillors couldn't be there. Now, we couldn't be there because we'd already explained that we couldn't be there, so something needs to happen there. We need those meetings up and running. And something else I'd like to raise is when an incident takes place in a ward, you know, you talk about Ickenham, we've had the same sort of instance in Townfield. The protocol used to be that councillors used to be alerted that something had taken place, so that if a resident came to us, we could stop the Chinese whispers, and that's not the right word to use, but stop the whispering, you know, giving it arms and legs. We could cut the baseless chatter down. That all stopped, and I raised it at an independent advisory group meeting, and then next time it happened, it started, but then again it stopped. That protocol was there when I joined the council in '94, and it used to work. You know, the councillors knew about what was going on in the ward, and all that seems to have disappeared. So can you take that back? Because we all need, as was said earlier on tonight, we all need to work together to be the whole of the jigsaw, not part of it, and not be diverted in any way. My question is to all of you, can you tell me how much work you do together on antisocial behaviour in the ward, how much liaison work you do amongst yourselves?
So quite a lot actually. So Inspector Rob Bryan, who I just had his retirement meeting today actually, who I think for the record has given an awful lot of dedicated service to the borough, is retiring, and we have Inspector Zubin Reiter who's coming on to take on the sector. So I spoke to Rob about this, and he says, so I'll tell you what happens at a local level, and then I'll tell you what sort of we can talk about what happens at our level. So Rob meets regularly. We have joint action plans to cover ASB, everything from sort of youth gathering to fly tipping, as well as drugs misuse. At an operational level, our sergeants and officers work with the ASBIT teams and community safety teams. So we are quite linked up there. Obviously, what we also have is the funded team, which is paid for by the local authority, and the work that the funded team does is set out in conjunction with the local authority and established there. So on an operational and a practical level, we work very closely together. At a strategic level, we work, I think, quite closely together. So under the new MOPAC plans around the violence reduction unit, that is a joint initiative between us across all sectors. In terms of, I would say we probably speak to one another on a relatively regular basis, at least if you're not speaking to me or Jill on at least a couple of times a week. So I think we are quite joined up on that. That's certainly my perspective. However, you might tell me we're terribly not.
No, and I would agree with that as well. I mean, we work very closely through the Safer Hillingdon Partnership Board, and as Mr. Gardner's just advised, that there are a number of initiatives which we work on, which are joint efforts to work towards the priorities and the targets that the board have set. And whether that be tackling violent crimes, knife crime, burglaries, but also those high visibility initiatives as well. And there is a nature to the work which is proactive and forward looking, and there's also an element which is understandably reactive as issues pop up. But no, I think we have a shared local authority and the BCU have a shared set of priorities through the Safe Hillingdon Partnership Board, and we work jointly to achieve those.
Can you, before I go to a couple of other questions, can you take back our grateful thanks to Inspector Rob Bryant, because he's been absolutely brilliant. He really has, and we've all, in one form or another, had dealings with him, and he's always given, way over 100%, and been a great servant to this borough, and a very effective police officer in all that he's done. So if you'd do that, that'd be great. Thank you, Councillor Dennis.
Yes. So the basic command units, to misquote a Spice Girls song, 3 became 1, and obviously as one of the 3 that became 1, the worry is that obviously we're going to get less attention, and because obviously the resources that were given to us might be given elsewhere, and that means things will get worse for us. I mean, that's sort of like the broad headline potential negative view of creating the basic command unit. Now we've had how long is the basic command unit? Is it a year and a bit? How long has it been? Yeah. So I suppose my question to you is, since the basic command units, we've had time for it to embed and see how it works. Do you think the quality of policing in Hillingdon is better, the same, or worse? And please, like a good exam question, please give reasons for your answers as well.
So, firstly, just to reiterate what the Commissioner said at our most recent senior leadership meeting, BCUs are here to stay. The situation we were in, so it's easy to look in hindsight, but if you go back to where we were when BCUs were established, it wasn't just the pressures of the funding situation we were under. We have a shortfall of specialist officers across the Met. We're about 800 detectives short. What that meant is that borough policing for crime squads, investigators, was becoming more and more difficult to do because we couldn't maintain the critical mass in some areas that we needed to do of specialist investigators, detectives basically. So without the flex of actually having to merge across boroughs and run that as it is, I think the service that would be given from an investigative perspective would be significantly worse, because some of those teams would be too small to operate independently. So by way of example, and I apologize I'm using a non-West area example, it's because when I did 2 mergers. I did the pilot in Central North, which was Islington and Camden, and then I did the most complex, which was Southwest, because that was a 4-borough merger. Southwest, for example, boroughs like Richmond were too small. Even more substantive boroughs like Merton didn't have a gangs team because they couldn't maintain, they didn't have the detective numbers to maintain anymore. So I think it's very difficult to say, or the service is much worse, or the service is much better, because you're dealing against something theoretical and something that's reality. But what I will say is that if we had continued at that rate, our ability to service investigations certainly would have been awful, significantly worse than it is now. The benefit we've got now is, so I think we've got to separate 2 things. One, the move to my investigations, which resulted in smaller neighbourhoods teams, was separate to the decision to go to BCUs. So those are 2 separate issues. But BCUs as an entirety, I think, I've got a lot more flexibility now, right? If we have, heaven forbid, a critical incident here, it's much easier for my command team to pull resources across the west area and focus them on that incident. That is a degree of flexibility that we didn't have previously. Secondly, if we look at some of our specialist commands, our Sapphire, so our rape command, or our Kate, our child abuse investigations team, those were separate remote commands that were not embedded in the local units. Because of our size now, we can justify having those units together. So our safeguarding teams and our ability to deliver that work is significantly greater than it was outside of the BCU. If I look at my investigations, well, this is the one area where I think we have to do more work. So my investigations, historically, the way it was is that our response officers were really reporting officers. They'd go to an incident, deal with the risk that was there, report it, and then someone else would come along and investigate it, right? The feedback we had from victims of crime was unacceptable. I get passed from pillar to post, etc. So our frontline officers now investigate low-level crimes themselves. That's why we have a higher number of response officers than we had previously. We are investing a lot more in training those people and bringing them up to speed, because a lot of them haven't investigated crimes for a long time. So we put dedicated detectives onto those teams. So I think there was a dip. It's a big change. There was a dip, but I think where we are now, that's recovered, and we're in a good position going forward.
I think, given the time, two last questions. One specific, one slightly more general. Conversion rate between crimes reported in Hillingdon and detected in Hillingdon. How's that going?
What we call our sanction detection rates, so these are where we got detections. Our burglary and robbery detection numbers are significantly lower than we wanted them to be. So we are at 9% now on burglary, where previously we were at, sorry if you bear with me, I'll just pull it up. Current 12 months, our sanction detection rate, this is burglary in Hillingdon, is 15%. Our sanction detection rate previously was 8.9%, so that's a significant increase in sanction detections. If I look at, I'm going across now into, that was business burglary. If I'm looking at residential, sorry, it just takes a second for the data. So I'm trying to give a flavour of where we are. So residential burglaries, previously we were at 3.6% in terms of sanction detections. We're up at 6.3 now, so we've pretty much doubled that. In terms of robberies, sorry if you bear with me. It always takes so slow, this. But then again, I shouldn't be complaining. I'm sitting here pulling stats from our centre. So, sorry. So if I look at, sorry, going back to burglary, that was monthly figures.
Sorry, can you just explain what sanction detection rate means? I don't know if I'm there.
So sanction detection is, so it's where we've actually had a detection on the crime. So we have identified the person who has committed the crime and then taken them through judicial process. So, so that was burglary. If I look at robbery, where we are, sorry, this time last year, robbery was at 1.3%. We're now up at 9% on robbery sanction detections. So we've seen, but the sanction detections, a lot of that is the improvement is because of the robbery and burglary squad, because they focus on the secondary investigations. For me, across the board, it is still too low. I think we're one of the better performing boroughs in the Met. Overall, our rate of sanction detections is just over 11%. So that's across all crime types, everything that we get. I'd like to see it better. It should be better. So that's why, so when I look at those two objectives I've given our officers, the first part of that was all around getting our offenders in and bringing them to justice. So I'm hoping to see a significant improvement of that, but we've come a long way in a very short space of time anyway.
And would that rate be assisted by officers gaining more and better local knowledge. So if they're more embedded in an area, they get to know what's going on, they get to know the people, they get to know who shouldn't be around, or who, all sorts of stuff, local intelligence, that sort of thing. Is that something that's dropped or been lost a little, do you think, or are you happy with where you are with that?
I think we can always do with more local intelligence. We work to our intelligence. We still get a significant amount of intelligence coming through our dedicated ward officers and PCSOs, so they link in quite closely with that. What we have now, which we didn't have previously, but because of the size of the BCU, is we have dedicated intelligence analysts now based on the BCU, as well as dedicated, what's the right word to put it? It's what we call our source unit, dedicated people who work with sources and work undercover on the BCU, which previously we would have been bidding centrally for that kind of resource, but we're big enough now to have our dedicated unit. So we do get good levels of intelligence coming through, and what we get is a lot of the proactive work that's done is driven by the neighbourhood officers. So when we're doing premises closures, drugs warrants, etc., most of that intelligence is coming from our neighbourhood officers as well as our proactive officers, obviously.
Okay, and finally, you've talked a lot about new officers and increased complement. As far as Hillingdon is concerned, what sort of numbers are we talking about that we're going to get specifically here?
I can't give you an exact figure. In terms of that's what we've got coming in, we'll have natural attrition off the back of that. Plus, we'll have what we're going on. What we will do is we'll get to full occupancy. So on our current numbers, those will be filled. And the uplift above that in the short term is going to be on the violence suppression team, which will work across all three boroughs. The further uplift that goes beyond that, which is around the total of 20,000 promised nationally, which Mr. Johnson has assured me he is delivering on. How many of those we will get as a BCU, and therefore how many we get as a borough, I don't know yet. I don't know those numbers, unfortunately. Yeah.
All right. Well, perhaps when you do know, you will come back and see us another time. Look, thank you so much, Ms. Gardner. It's as you can tell, it's something that we're very, very concerned about, and it's a major part of what this committee does. But as I say, we don't get quite so many opportunities to deal with policing as we would like, I think. So we'll have a look at how we rebalance that. But for the moment, I think, unless there's any other questions from anybody, thank you very much, and thank you, Jackie and Dan as well. All right. So I suspect it's work programme that's left, and Nikki, if you want to guide us through that for a few seconds.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. We have just 3 more meetings before the end of the municipal year. Our next meeting, I'm hoping to have NHS England, NHS Improvements attending to come and talk to us about Mount Vernon Cancer Centre. There has been an appointment now made of UCLH to replace East and North Herts Hospital Trust to be the cancer specialist at Mount Vernon. That will be effective, subject to due diligence. It will be effective from the 1st of April 2021. In the meantime, from the 1st of April this year, UCLH will be providing management support to East and North Herts at Mount Vernon. There's a possibility that a JOSC is going to be set up, and we'll get more information on that as it progresses. So that'll be March. I'm not sure that particular update will take very long. So I wondered whether, I know members are interested in having Hillingdon Hospital attending at some point to talk.
Get them there.
Yeah, because then it's all very health related, and I know it's something that members are particularly interested in talking to Hillingdon Hospital about the CQC performance and the recovery plan. Okay, so I'll speak to them about getting them in for that meeting. And then the following meetings, the last 2 meetings of the year on the 29th and 30th of April, are both health related again. So there'll be the quality account reports. I've split the trusts, so we have 2 on one night, 2 on the other night, the ones that actually produce the quality accounts, with the addition of Healthwatch and others that don't produce quality accounts on both if they so choose. Chairman?
We went Oh, I thought you wanted me to speak. Councillor Dennis.
Can I make a suggestion that everyone assumes that the papers have been read and everyone's limited to 5 minutes of giving their presentation, and literally they have to keep to that, because if they provide us with reports and papers, it's up to us to read them. Otherwise, because the one last year just went on and 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 on. And then some. So, as a suggestion.
Yeah. Councillor Roddy.
Chairman, could we also make sure that the papers are therefore provided in advance, perhaps a week or so, that we can actually read them in order to be able to do our jobs?
Two things on that. One, we're dependent on them supplying the papers, and they're sometimes not terribly good on getting them in time. Two, we've tried that before. They're very I'll try and keep them very, very tight. We've said to them before, X minutes only. They do like to not just tell us, but they're telling their colleagues as well. And there is quite a lot, but we'll do it again and get them to keep down to a relatively short time. So we've got more time to ask questions at the point. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we could get the traffic lights. We went to the Cancer Unit Summit last week at Mount Vernon, which was extremely interesting. And one of the things that came out of that was the ongoing scrutiny of the unit, which the idea is to share with other authorities that participate in their residents going to the Mount Vernon Cancer Centre. And there was an awful lot of information that we got from that. But I'll tell you much more about that next time, because there was quite a lot to talk about as far as that was concerned. All right, well, if there's nothing else on that, that's great. In which case, I can say thank you very much and declare the meeting over.